All right. Hi, guys. My name is Rishabh Chakraborty, and I have been a part of this economics and finance cluster here at Little Bank for the last few months, and I'll be moderating today's roundtable. The topic for a roundtable discussion today is: Has the power of balance shifted to Asia economically over the years compared to the West? So let's just get started with it. So to start with the first question, in the context of India, do you believe like how big of a role would India play in the shift towards a multipolar world? And what is India's socioeconomic status in the age of Asia? Um,
Yeah, so I think India is playing a really pivotal role when it comes to the socio-economic shift towards a more multipolar world. And I think India will continue to play a very important role in the same. So if we look at the sort of influence that India is having in the global political discourse, it has been growing over the years and it will continue to grow. India has also been leading a lot of the global forums. We've been leading the G20 very recently. In terms of our military capabilities as well, we are doing a very good job. When it comes to the sort of influence that our military capabilities have as well, I think we are doing a fantastic job. We've had a lot of countries like the Philippines approach us to buy military technologies like the BrahMos missile in January last year. So, yeah, I think India is on the right track to becoming a very important player in the global political discourse.
yes, thank you for
Yes.
those points, Arush. Would anyone like to? Yes, Sanya.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Arush's points, and I think just to add more flesh to the framework, even I believe that diplomatic engagements and defense capabilities of India have been playing a significant role in this transition or the shifting of economic gravity towards Asia. And I think there's this exigency to prepare for a new phase of globalization. But I feel while India is poised to play a substantial role in this more multipolar world, or say the age of Asia. It also faces some external and internal challenges that will shape its trajectory. For example, the internal threats are the significant economic challenges, including the income inequality, poverty, or access to basic services. And when I say external threats, I'm concerned with more the controversial China's new national map, which depicts vast areas of India, Malaysia, and Philippines as the Chinese territory. And they underscore the threat posed by China's increasingly aggressive behavior. So, yeah, the role is significant, but how it goes in the future trajectory is something they're leery.
Thank you, Sanya. Yes, Vasu.
Yes, just to add on to what Arush and Sania said. Look, I think India is among the top five global economies of the world, and it is the most populous country in the world also. And also, we know that IMF has actually commended our growth, and we have an average growth rate of close to 6 to 7% on a year-on-year basis. Which by itself shows that India is has come to that level wherein it can play a dominant role when it comes to global economy. And speaking of leadership, I would definitely say that with the current government, I would certainly say that India successfully hosted the G20 summit, and I strongly feel that the future of India looks really very bright, and it will certainly under a dominant role in for years to come.
Yes, I agree because like while these things are true that the growth rates for India have been immense, and I agree with all of Arsh's point. I think it's also important to like going forward to like remember at the same time to acknowledge the problems that we are facing right now, as Sanya mentioned. But yes, going on to the next question, like in the context of the West, how can the West preserve its global influence while effectively adapting to the shifting economic landscape? Anyone can go first.
Yeah, so I think two major points to cover in this regard. I think the first point is that the Western countries still have a lot of the important companies relating to technology. that the global that the world still depends on, may it be Google or other companies like Qualcomm, which is gaining significant importance and will continue to become more and more important with our increasing dependence on technology. The second way in which the West can preserve its influence is through soft power. So Western culture, Western cultural elements in general still continue to have a lot of influence all over the world. And, that still has a very strong grasp over how people would perceive the West. And I think if they could still continue to use that to exert their influence, they can still preserve it in a very effective manner.
Right. Vasu, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh yes, I just have very little amount of points to add. And also just adding on to what Arush had said, I would definitely say that the West must acknowledge the growth of great Asian powers such as India and China. And in addition to that, I would certainly say that the West must foster cooperation among various countries, and they must ensure that they are a partner in the growth story of various countries to come. And I think these are the only two points which I could add. And also, I think the one major point wherein the West can help the countries to grow is that they can help the countries grow by by granting aids, by partnering with them, and by providing them technical support to grow. So I think by this they could preserve the growth.
Sanya, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I fully agree with both of them that, for preserving Western areas' global influence while effectively adapting to the shifting economic landscape, it requires a combination of, I think, strategic, economic, and diplomatic measures. What I want to concentrate more on is the economic adaptation of the West. They should focus on diversification, in my opinion, because Western economies, if they diversify their industries to remain competitive in a changing global landscape, that will be more effective than engaging in zero sum rivalries. And I feel emphasizing the high value manufacturing services and the emerging sectors is more crucial towards developing and preserving their influence.
Yeah, like these are about the points like I would like to add as well. Like I would like just to reiterate about how providing aid to the growing country as we move towards a more globalized world and focusing on newer industries to preserve their significance. So thank you for those interesting points. Um, okay. As we know, like over the past few years, China's growth rate has been immense. So keeping that in view, what are the implications of the rise of China for the global economy? Anyone can start answering.
So, I think China is playing a very important role in terms of manufacturing because the a lot of the supply chains of the world heavily depend on countries like China in terms of manufacturing goods at a very cheap rate. So, since most countries follow a more capitalistic approach towards production, they would naturally want to outsource the manufacturing part of it to countries where it's a lot cheaper to find labor. So, in that sense, China is playing a very pivotal role. I think the issue that stems from it is that st- there is a degree of over dependence on China when it comes to cheap production, and the countries around the world are struggling a little to sort of reduce that dependence. A lot of countries are trying to move manufacturing to countries like India, and they are succeeding to a certain degree. But as of now, I really don't think that there is major change in terms of which country is preferred when it comes to manufacturing of goods. The second thing is, I think China is doing a lot in terms of investing in other countries. So China is one of those countries which is heavily investing in continents like Africa. If you look at the mines in Africa, a lot of them have been set up with the help of Chinese foreign direct investment. A lot of the Chinese banks are some of the biggest in the world, and they are really pumping in a lot of money into that continent. So I think in that sense, China is exerting a lot of its influence around the world.
Sanya, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Arush, but again, contrary to this research, so if I want to add something in pro or maybe to back up this, I also feel that China's government has spurred rapid advances in literacy. So Shanghai and Beijing showed literacy rates on par with the developed economies by 2014, for say. Other Asian economies will need to ramp up education reforms if they aim to reproduce China's labor dynamics, especially. But contrary to this research, I stumbled upon this article prompting to China's economic slump and a potential reversal of fortunes for India and China. And it also pointed out that India's total factor productivity exceeded that of China by 0.5% per annum. And over the last 10 years, this excess total factor productivity growth was 1.5% per annum. So I feel in the long run, there's this role reversal that is being prompted by economists such as Sujit Bhalla and Kiran Khanna. So I feel that this is something that we really need to look into now.
Yes, Vasu.
Yes, speaking of the global implications of China's growth, I would certainly say that being the second largest economy of the world and also being the factory of the world, like almost all the Western countries, they outsource their production to China. So due to this, China by itself has an advantage over other countries. So being an exporter by itself, it also maintains a trade surplus with other countries, which China has been misusing a lot. So, speaking of the implications, I would certainly say that, India, India being an emerging superpower, India must definitely, work with the West just to make sure that the influence of China is curtailed or contained to some extent. That our focus must be on to make sure that, China doesn't misuse on its own powers just because, it has, greater advantages. So these are the points which I would like to add.
Yes, like as you called it, it's essentially the factory of the world. Um, yeah, and also you're totally right about how they can abuse their power. But also an interesting point made by Sanya is how the factor productivity of India has been exceeding China, which I had no idea about. So that's a really interesting perspective to look at it at the same time. All right. Now, again, from the perspective of the West, do you think the West supports the economic development of Asian countries? Arush, you may start.
I mean, honestly speaking, they would only do so to a certain extent. Um, they do support the growth of Eastern countries up to the point that it's beneficial for them in terms of business and in terms of things like foreign direct investment. They wouldn't really be favorable when it comes to policies like anti-dumping duties, which India is very aggressively imposing on countries like China right now in order to preserve their own economies. They wouldn't really be um, favorable to any sort of growth which would result in some form of competition in their markets and which could potentially harm their markets in any way. So, yeah, only to a limited extent.
Yes, Vasu.
Yes. Yeah. So, just like Arush had already said, the answer is both yes and no. Look, I would look even I would strongly agree that India has great allies in the West. So I would strongly say that US and France are one of the strongest allies of India. And India also has major defense deals with both US and India. So India had actually bought their Rafale fighter jets from France. And I would certainly say the same for US as well. So India and US have a very, very long historical defense cooperation. So if it is in their own favor, if it is actually in the West favor, the West would certainly support India's growth. And if it is something which is against them, they would definitely not support India's growth. If I were to even say about one example, during the coronavirus pandemic, the then US president Mr. Donald Trump had actually threatened to impose sanctions on India if India didn't release the hydroxychloroquine or the HCQ tablets. So he had actually threatened to impose sanctions on India. So this might even tell us that West is something which is not okay with the growth of Asian countries and particularly India and China. But it totally depends upon the situation which we are dealing with. The only thing which I would certainly say is that countries like India and China must have their own independent foreign policy and their own growth trajectory. So I think in the long run, the countries must put their own interests first when compared to the others' interests.
Yes, Sanya.
I feel it will just be a roundup of the points both of them have covered, and I also feel that Western countries in collaboration with Asian nations, they'll support the infrastructure development projects through public and private investments, and these may also include funding, transportation, energy, and communication infrastructure. However, it is essential to note, as they both pointed out, that the level and nature of support can vary among the Western countries and within different regions of Asia as well, because political and economic interests may influence the priorities and approaches of Western countries. So, yeah, this relationship will be multifaceted, a mix of cooperation and competition in various domains.
Like essentially the points have been wrapped up. Like they would support the economic development and like to the degree of their own benefit. And which would like any country for that fact, to be honest. All right. And for our last question of this month's roundtable, again in the context of India, how can India promote inclusive development in the Asian region in this regard? Sanya, would you like to start?
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so I feel that in India, the strong need for new ideas dovetails with existing social and structural conditions. So, if India has to promote a more inclusive growth, they can bank on things like South-South cooperation. For example, India can engage in a South-South cooperation by sharing its development experiences and best practices with other Asian countries. This can include knowledge transfer, technical assistance, and in areas such as agriculture, healthcare, education, and technology. And I feel regional economic integration is something that India can bank upon. So India can actively participate in the economic integration efforts, such as the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation or the Bay of Bengal Initiative for the multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation. But one thing they can surely venture into is social safety nets. If they develop and share a knowledge on effective social safety net programs, that will protect the vulnerable populations from the economic shocks.
Vasu, would
So
you
adding
like
on
to
to
add?
Sania's
Oh
points,
yeah, Arush. Yes.
sorry, can I go ahead? Yeah. So adding on to Sania's points, I think regional economic cooperation is especially important looking at where India is geographically located. I think there are a lot of complicated um, conflicts that come out of it, and I think it's very important for India to foster more regional economic cooperation because eventually that does help in more diplomatic cooperation when it comes to conflict resolution. And I think the second point is India should also, in my opinion, try to use their soft power a little bit more. I think Indian culture, Indian popular culture is very influential and is pretty popular in a lot of places around the world. And I think it's only going to grow in the future. And it is going to be beneficial when India is going to use it to its advantage and really use it to extend its influence in other countries around the world.
Yes, Vasu.
Yes, just to add my own points. Uh, Look, as already said earlier in my earlier points, India is an emerging superpower, and it is one of the the major forces in the Indian Ocean itself. Just as in the name suggests, India is actually the largest player in the Indian Ocean area. And I think if I were to speak of one example of one major policy initiative which the government has taken would be the Act East policy. So through this policy, India has been working closely with its neighbors to make sure that they are equally developed, just as India. India has a huge amount of cooperation projects with countries such as Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, and yeah, they like countries such as these. So yeah, just as like like Arush and Sania said, India must exert its own soft power. Like all of us know that the Indian movies are really very famous among like all countries of the world. So like in India can use its uh, cultural heritage, movies, just to exert its own soft power.
All right, yeah. So that is it for today's roundtable. Thank you guys for such a fruitful discussion and for such an interactive session. It was really enjoyable, and I look forward to much more roundtables in the coming future. And I shall just stop recording. Yeah.